Hey guys, I'm going to give you a brief overview of an app I created, but before we begin, I just want to give a little explanation behind the app and the purpose of it. So, this app is for a video game called Destiny 2. In the game, players are tasked with traversing different worlds, each with a set of unique quests, adventures, and loot to obtain. Seeing as these worlds can be slightly expansive, my app is designed to show the location of many of these events that take place throughout each world. Along with that, it shows the items that can be attained from completing each event. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to show you the code I used to make this work, along with the simulation of the app running. To begin, we're going to look at the main storyboard located right here. Contained within the storyboard are a total of 6 objects. 5 of them are view controllers with 1 navigation controller. First, we're going to look at the main view controller located in the middle of the storyboard. This view controller contains a picker view, a UI image view, along with a button. Now, to get an idea of how we're transferred to each of these other view controllers, we have to first understand the picker view. So, when looking at the code, you can see here that there is a variable called world. This world is an array, and it contains 4 elements inside of it. Each of these elements is the name of one of these other view controllers. So, this picker view was created first off by using this array to determine the number of rows in the component. So seeing as there are 4 elements in this array, there are 4 rows in the picker view. Next, when determining the label of each of these rows, once again we use the world. So seeing as EDZ, IO, Nessus, and Titan are the names inside of this array, that's what the names in the picker view will be. Next, we see here that there's another array called world image. Now this coincides with the world array because each of these images shows a preview of what one of these worlds looks like. So when determining which image will display, it's based off the picker view itself. So as you can see, this was called world image, and this is right here called world image, which will be what previews in the UI image right here. So now that we have an understanding of the picker view and the UI image, we need to get an understanding of how this is initiated. When looking at the button right here, you can see that the code is depicted by an if statement. So in order for that to be accomplished, first a variable had to be created called which row, which we set the value to 0. Now, each of these if statements here has a different value. This value is determined by the row that is selected. So if the first row is selected, a value of 0 is placed on it, meaning that the first segue is initiated. Now, to get an idea of what the segues are and how they were created, you can see here that there are lines coming from the main view controller to each of these other view controllers located on the outside of it. Each of these lines was set up to have a unique identifier attached to it. So if you click on it, this one for example, you can see that it has an identifier of EDZ. Now coming back to the code itself, you can see that if the row selected is the first row, the segue will be performed with the identifier called EDZ, which will basically send us right here. And if we want to get back, that's what the navigation controller is for. It allows us to get back easily to the main view controller. So now that we've established how to use the picker view to navigate between view controllers contained within the same storyboard, let's take a closer look at one of these view controllers. So as you can see here, we have the EDZ view controller, and in the class section, you may notice the UI scroll view delegate located here. So basically what this does is allows the view controller to use a map scroll, allowing the user to scroll through an image. So along with the scroll view, you'll also need a UI image view in which the image will be contained. So if we look over here at the scene, you'll notice that there's the view, which is the entire view controller, and inside that view is a map scroll, and contained within that map scroll is a map view. Now if you're looking ahead, you may notice that there's also a button view located here, along with a button view outlet, which is actually a UI view in the Swift code. Now, while I'll go into detail with that further, a little explanation behind that is that this contains all the buttons which a user will be able to click, and once clicked, those buttons will display information about a certain event or a certain adventure located within that view controller. So, If we look at this view controller a little bit more in depth here, you'll see that there are a couple more elements on this view controller. First, you have a slider along with 4 switches. We're going to look at the slider first right here. So if we look at the switch file, you'll see that there are 2 slider elements. There is an outlet named map slider, which is still connected to the slider, along with an action named map slider 2, which is also connected to that same slider. Now, the reason for this is quite simple. So the outlet right here dictates what the value to send to the action. So when a user goes back, there's a negative value, and when the user goes forward, there's a positive value. Now, this action right here, which has been fed into by the outlet, will determine how big or small to transform the map view, which in reality is our UI image view located right here within the scroll view. So when you're looking at this, you can see that when the slider is slid to the left, the map view will grow smaller, and when it's slid to the right, the map view will grow bigger. Now, again, if you're looking forward slightly, you'll notice that the same thing can be said about the button view. And here's where I'll explain why this was done. So instead of placing the buttons directly onto the UI image view, aka the map view, I placed them into a button view. And the reason behind this was when they were placed inside of a UI image view, these buttons were not scrolling with the map view, so constraints weren't applying, and the buttons were not shrinking or growing along with the map, and the user would not gain an experience of being able to navigate thoroughly where each of these locations were at in the game. So in order to combat this problem, I simply made a UI button view here, which I placed these buttons into, and then tied it into the slider function, allowing this to basically transform the map view and the button view simultaneously. And in order to do so, if we take a step back and click on the map view, you'll notice that the map view, or as it may be called, the UI view, is quite large here. So if we also click on the button view, you'll notice that nothing changes. And this is because the UI button view that I have established and the UI map view that I have established are the same size and in the same location, which further allows for the simultaneous scrolling in and out. So now that we've established why this was done and the slider function, let's take a closer look at those switches. So when zooming in, you can see that there are 4 switches here: Quest, Adventures, Events, and Treasure. So each of these switches ties into a different set of buttons. So if we take a look at the switch file over here, you'll see that there are a lot of buttons here. So if we just take any of them, for example, here we'll look at Adventure 7 button EDZ. You'll notice that this is set up as an action, and this is tied directly to a specific UI button located within that button view. So when this action is pressed, an alert is called, and this alert shows a little bit of information. Specifically, it shows the title of the adventure. It shows a little bit of sub-information, as in what the required level to do this adventure is, and it also shows a reward. On top of that, I've set it up to where these alerts show an image as well. And then to give a little bit of explanation about how this was done, we first have to go over and look at the new switch file that was created for this project. Now here in this function, an action was created. And for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to go over the fact that this action was named image. So anytime the action image is called in the UI alert section, it's going to allow for an image to be placed in the UI alert. So if we go back and we look at the main storyboard over here, we take a look back on the EDZ, we'll see that it's calling image, and that image is set to be a UI image, and it's going to display a specific image that I have loaded into Xcode. So now that we have an idea of what these buttons are capable of, let's look at how they were implemented to be used with switches. So if we keep scrolling down, you'll see that there are a lot of outlets created, each tied to the same buttons. Now these outlets are named somewhat different, but they basically apply the same things. Now these needed to be outlets because of the simple fact that these outlets were going to be tied to another action. These actions were the switches, and as you can see here, we have the adventure switch, and located within the adventure switch we have all the adventures. So what these switches do is they are able to both hide and show a vast amount of buttons at the simultaneous times. So as you can see, if statements were used to show if the switch is on, then the buttons are not hidden, located by the false statement. Now if the button is off, the is hidden statement is true, meaning that the buttons will be hidden. And this was done for each category of buttons. There are quite a lot. But if we come down here, another thing you need to be implemented was the super view did load function needed to be used in order to make sure that all of these buttons were hidden once the app was loaded. So if this wasn't done, all the buttons would be present, and while they would still respond to the switches, it wouldn't have the same effect, seeing as the person would have to use the button in order to turn it off. So now that we have an understanding of the coding that lies beneath this app, let's take a closer look at the app running. If we click Simulator, the first thing you'll notice is that there's a picker view, and underneath that picker view is a UI image view. Now when we scroll through these picker views through each world, you'll notice that a preview of each world changes. So if we were to stop on this world and click Go, you'll notice that a map pops up. Now this map is different for each world, as you'll see here. EDZ is different than IO. IO is different than Nessus. And Nessus is different from Titan. So let's take a quick look at one of these worlds just to get an understanding of the app itself. So if we click on EDZ here, you'll see that the map is completely scrollable. And along with being scrollable, the user is allowed to zoom out, getting a full view of the map, or zoom in to look upon closer details. So let's look at some of the information that can be displayed on this map. You'll see at the bottom there are a total of 4 switches. These switches are able to populate the world with different buttons. So if we click Quest, you'll see that a button appears. If we click Adventures, you'll see that quite a few buttons appear, and the same for Events and Treasure. Now, along with being able to populate the world with these buttons, we're also allowed to unpopulate the world. So if we click Treasures, you'll see the Treasures disappears, and the same thing can be said for Events and Adventures. So let's take a closer look at what these buttons do. So if we zoom in to get a better view on Quest, you'll see when the Quest button is clicked, it shows the name of the quest, the reward, and then an image of that reward. Now, the same thing can be said for adventures, but adventures are somewhat different. Seeing as there's many adventures on this map, each adventure gives different loot. So if we click this adventure, you'll notice that it shows a different image along with a different required power level and the different reward. And the same thing can be said for this image. It shows that this reward is rare gear. And as you can see, event and treasure are different as well. This one gives a random reward, and this one gives a random reward, but the images displayed are different as well. So one thing that was quite difficult to achieve was having these buttons stay in place no matter where the user went on the map. So as you can see, the scroll has no effect on these buttons, along with the zoom. The buttons stay completely in place. Now, while these buttons are in place on this map, this isn't to say that the buttons are in the same spot on a different map. So if we look at IO, for instance, although we're able to scroll here, the buttons are in different locations, and this is representative of where those events or adventures take place in the actual game. So guys, that's a general overview of the app itself. I hope you enjoyed, and if you would like any more information or the code used behind this app, feel free to look at the detail sections in the comments below. I'll have it listed there, and you can go to the GitHub page to download the app itself. Thanks guys.